How you doing, everybody? This is Ken Bikoff here with Peegs.com publisher and founder Mike Pegram, and welcome to our show. You know, the Hoosiers close up the regular season with a loss to Michigan State at Assembly Hall on Saturday, and they fall to 19-12 on the season. They're 9-9 in the Big Ten, and they close the season on a 3-game skid. Just talk about a little bit of the fallout of that loss to Michigan State.
Well, it's not just been a 3-game skid. Since January 22nd, which is over 7 weeks, they're 4-8, and those 4 wins are against the bottom of the league. I think
and 2 of them against Rutgers.
Yeah, the best team that they beat was, in terms of seeds for the Big Ten, was Michigan, which I think is a 9 seed.
Yeah,
and so there's no real marquee wins for quite a long time, and losing 3 at home doesn't go over very well, at all. But they did do enough work early in the season to put themselves in position to still make the NCAA, and they did show a little bit more spunk yesterday. It wasn't as bad as Tuesday night's loss to Iowa. They came back and had a chance, with the free throws, with a couple seconds left to tie the game. They didn't go down on the second one. The first one barely went down. It was almost like a mirror image of each other, those 2 free throws, and everybody gasped and got the first one, didn't get the second. But they had put themselves into position, and they needed almost a miracle to get it, and they came as close as you can to getting it. But a lot of that was gifted from Michigan State, missing free throws and turning the ball over late, because Indiana was down double digits with three some minutes to go, and that's a terrible position to put yourself in.
and especially with a team that has not played well of late. They've been inconsistent up and down. You talked about them losing 3 straight at home. It's the first time since 2010-11 season that that's happened to IU. That was one of Crean's first 3 teams. So if you want to look at when the program was more legitimate, I guess you want to say, when it had the proper talent and there had been some experience. It was the first time since 2004-05 with Mike Davis since they've lost 3 straight games at home, and now they have to try to wipe the slate clean and deal with the Big Ten tournament. And I think that's going to be a bit of a challenge, especially for a young team, to put what has already happened behind them.
Yeah, you just don't see that on the floor, that this team has the energy that it had earlier in the year. They just look worn down. Now there was more yesterday, I'm talking about Saturday, than we saw in the prior couple games. But this is going to be a tough road, the Big Ten tournament, playing regularly every day if they continue to win. And you just don't see that the fight in this team was better, but it's still not what it needs to be. Now, maybe they'll get that first win. It's not going to be a great opponent. It's somebody they should be able to beat, but they'll have to play better than they have been.
Yeah, and it was kind of telling to me too that everybody, you hope that they go into a tournament looking at winning out, go into the tournament and win the tournament. And I thought it was interesting that Yogi Ferrell said that they're going to Chicago and they were looking to win a couple of games. And certainly, your focus is the next game. And I don't think that he was saying that they didn't have a chance to win. But I thought that was an interesting kind of mindset for them, especially considering they didn't know who they were playing when he said it, that, it was a thing of, we're just going to go there and try to win a couple of games.
Yeah, they need to have a cause, and I just don't sense a cause in that team right now. But I have seen, and you have seen, teams that look like they're dead to rights come into a conference tournament and somebody gets hot, or maybe a couple guys get hot, and all of a sudden they turn it on. And with a team that can shoot the ball the way Indiana can, I think there's still that possibility they could shoot their way to a couple wins and maybe get to the weekend, which would make all the difference in the world as far as their NCAA outlook. Or maybe they get one win and get into the tournament and then find that shooting stroke next week in Dayton and wherever they might go for the NCAA second round.
That's why I understand people talking about this being a dangerous team, because now they don't play defense and they don't really rebound all that well, but they can shoot the ball. And when you have guys that can shoot the ball as well as Yogi Ferrell and Nick Zeisloft and Robert Johnson and James Blackman, when you're facing a team and they're able to come at you from a number of different angles, I think that's going to be really the challenge for teams that have to defend them. And they do end up having to play in that first game teams that Indiana has been challenged by, but that Indiana has beaten.
Yeah, we're talking about a play-in game and how that might build up, I think, to a better outcome if they had not played them that Tuesday or Wednesday. So I think there's a real chance of that. I think it's an excellent point, Ken. Get that rough game out of the way, get the atmosphere behind them, and then they can start believing in themselves again. Because this team does not look like it believes in itself at the moment.
Yeah, and that's going to be the real challenge. It's just getting these kids mentally where they need to be. And that's something that we haven't really talked about, is just the fatigue. You're talking about a team with a lot of freshmen who are playing a lot of minutes. And this is more basketball than they've ever had to play in their life at a much higher level than they've had to play. You're talking about smaller players who have had to defend bigger guys, and that takes its physical toll as well. And now you get into a day after day after day situation. It's really going to be interesting to see how this team reacts in that kind of situation.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about the lack of size, and the defense has been atrocious this year. But the depth has been another issue that's really caught up with them at the end of the year. They were down Devin Davis, and they've been down Hunter at times, but losing Colin Hartman and just barely getting him back for just limited minutes, and not the same Colin Hartman, has taken its toll. And the only consistent producer off the bench has been Nick Seiseloft, who's been terrific actually, but he's not a great defensive player. So they really seem to have, didn't die. The legs didn't die maybe as bad yesterday. They did show some comeback, but the depth isn't one of those 3 or 4 main things working against him.
And that's the energy of being in a building that you know well, with fans who love you. It's going to be different at the United Center. Because, there will probably be a lot of IU fans there, but again, the whole dynamic of that place is different. You're talking about deeper backgrounds, which is something that comes up all the time, especially in those kinds of buildings, which is a much deeper background. And then you get into, you have a lot of these freshmen who have played big games, but again, it's going to the United Center. It's going to, just have all the hoopla of their first college postseason tournament. It's going to be interesting to see how they play. Now, they're scheduled to tip off at 5:30 Central Time, so 6:30 Eastern on Thursday. And, as it stands right now, we're not exactly sure who they're going to play.
Yeah, we're cutting this in the afternoon. We just saw that Minnesota lost at home to Penn State, which was a big surprise because the Gophers looked like the most logical team to pick going into the day as far as the 10 seed that Indiana have to face. So they won't play Minnesota, which is the team that blitzed with a school record number of 18 three-pointers. So maybe that's bad news that Indiana doesn't get Minnesota again. We're looking at Northwestern or Nebraska, teams that Indiana split against. They won to Nebraska and won, but that was in December, long time ago. And a good defensive team, but not a great offensive team, which in some ways I think might be a good formula for Indiana. If they're not a great offensive team, they can't take advantage maybe of Indiana's issues on defense. And they aren't blessed with a lot of size, a lot of good size. Northwestern is interesting because they play this zone that Indiana seemed to solve for a half and then completely didn't solve in the second half. And that I think would be interesting because we're in Chicago where Northwestern is located near, and there would be a chance for redemption for Indiana to do something against that zone. And the Wildcats aren't terribly talented. They have some solid guys in Trey Demps and Alex Ola was a bad matchup for Indiana. Even though he's not a great inside player, but against Indiana this year, 7-footer who plays aggressive can get a lot of things done inside. And Brian McIntosh, a local kid from Greensburg, but that would be I think the most interesting matchup. Though we got this Tim Miles Tom Crean incident. They might not be good friends as they used to be, so that would be a nice little side story.
Well, let's talk about Nebraska for a second, because this is a team that went into the season with pretty high expectations, and they haven't lived up to them even remotely. No. And so now this is an opportunity for that team also to kind of clean the plate and start fresh. And again, that's the kind of team that has everything to play for. That could be very, very dangerous.
Yeah, and we're talking about Nebraska if Nebraska beats Maryland tonight. Right. And that's a late game. And if they beat Maryland, their confidence will be up. And they've got 2 proven guys in Pettaway and Siobhan Shields are really tough guys. Pettaway's not shot the balls that well from the field, but he's a real tough physical matchup for Indiana. If he's shooting the ball better than he was the first matchup, that changes everything. And they'll have nothing to lose, and that's always dangerous. Well, Indiana has a lot to lose. If they lose that game, they're probably headed to the NIT.
Yeah, and so that's certainly going to be a challenge for this team, and heading to the NIT isn't going to do anything to quiet the folks who have been talking about the coaching situation.
No, I mean, Indiana has a resume this year that they'll definitely get an NIT bid if they don't get the NCAA situation. But this year I think would be less welcome than last year.
Yeah.
And, I don't know. I think it would be good for a young team in the long run to have that experience. But from a fan base perspective, I don't know if they have the patience to really show up in large quantities for those games. I think there could be some interesting matchups at the NIT kind of ranges for them. But I guess we'll tackle that if we get to that situation because, it would be helpful for a young team. Like I said, it might have its positives. It might have more positives in the long run than going to Dayton and losing right away.
Yeah.
So it'll definitely extend the season. I would think that Indiana might get a home game or two to start it off.
Yeah, and then again, that'll be interesting. Again, last time Indiana played in the NIT was Mike Davis's second to last year. They played Vanderbilt, lost that first game, didn't get a lot of fan support, and it would be really interesting considering some of the fan rumblings that we've heard of late. Now here's the thing. A lot of people talking about Tom Crean's job security. Bottom line is Indiana's not going to make any kind of decision about that until after the season is officially over. So a lot of speculation is just that, rumors, things that you've heard. Whether it's comes from good sources or not, it's still a process that's in the process of playing out. Now that said, Tom Crean used to be an assistant coach with Tom Izzo at Michigan State, and we'll let you guys see what Izzo had to say defending Tom Crean after IU's loss last night.
Am I a little frustrated with it? Yeah, I am. Do I think he's a hell of a coach? Yes, I do. Do I think he's going to make adjustments just like I do and everybody else? Probably. But I'm telling you, the guy can coach and the guy can recruit. And he built my program. He helped me build my program. My program wouldn't be as good as it is if it wasn't for Tom Crean. I mean that. I really do.
Now, of course, Mike, Tom Izzo is going to defend his friend. He's going to take care of a guy that he's been a coach with, that he's known for a long time. What do you take out of Izzo's comments?
Well, I think it was interesting you brought up a lot of the stuff that happened in the fall. Mm-hmm. It's kind of left our minds in a long way. And as maybe his thought on what was causing a lot of the problems. I think more of it's the current status of the 19-12 and losing 3 in a row and 8 out of 12 and the defensive issues that they've had all season. I think fans have kind of gotten over them because there's not been any follow-up issues with off-the-court problems. But I think he went out of his way to talk about the coaching job Tom did yesterday, and he arguably outcoached in the last few minutes to pull his team back to win. They just were one free throw short of tying the game and putting it into overtime. But we'll see. They're really close. They worked on the same staff. They're both from the state of Michigan, so coaches defend themselves, and that's what you saw. But he did a very good job of with his plea there.
Now, here's the interesting thing about this year. Indiana, again, closes the season 19-12 in the regular season, finishes tied for 7th in the Big Ten. And you took a look at kind of preseason expectations of what it might be for the team. Looking back, has this team reached and met expectations?
And actually, it's been pretty close to being right there. We looked at them in the spring and had them slotted 8th. Saw them in Canada, and plus there was personnel changes for all teams. Looked at it again, I think, around September, and I moved them up to 6th because what I saw in Canada was a team that was better offensively than I anticipated. I mean, they really showed their shooting ability there, and didn't show how much they'd struggled defensively, but at least we learned a little bit more about how much firepower they had. Moved them up to 6. At the same time, we measured the preseason magazines that were coming out, and at least 4 or 5 of them, I think, and they had Indiana about 8th on average. So now we're here at the end of the season, finished tied for 7th. I think with Illinois, and they get the tiebreaker for the 7th seed because they won that one meeting with Illinois. So they did no better than the 8th seed in terms of record. So they're really close to what projections were from the preseason magazines, which isn't usually the case, and we weren't much higher than that. So they kind of came in. It's just the road to that was so uneven.
Yeah, and as somebody who's worked on those kinds of magazines in the past, I can tell you that those magazines are written and worked out and printed in June.
Yeah.
So so this was well before anything happened with Devin Davis, well before Emmett Holt came on board. But I think the grumblings haven't even been so much about them meeting expectations or not, but rather how they've been playing. The lack of defense has been an issue. Their inability to just find consistency at home. And again, some of the struggles that they've had just to score of late. You've had James Blackman, I think, without question, has hit the freshman wall and has struggled a little bit with his shooting. He's still produced in certain games, but you're not seeing that consistency. And it's a team that, Indiana fans expect them to play a certain way, expect to see a certain level, and so it's not even so much about preseason expectations as it is over these past dozen games. When you're supposed to be playing your best basketball of the season, Indiana hasn't delivered.
Yeah, and the saving grace for them is that the tournament doesn't take that into account, supposedly.
Yes.
It used to be the last 10 games were the big factor in whether a team gets into the tournament, NCAA tournament. Now, I guess it doesn't. So,
do you think it should?
I think it should. I think I look at Purdue's case. They had some struggles in December against some mid-major teams. Now I think Purdue's probably in with that win this weekend, but they've been playing really well.
Mm-hmm.
They should be in without question, but because they've been playing well in the second half of the year. Well, Indiana played a good January, real solid January. Actually, they beat Butler in December, so they had a really good month, I think, following the Louisville loss. Mm-hmm. But they have not been able to sustain that. I don't want to say that they've gotten worse, but other teams have gotten better. Other teams have scouted their offense and their, what they do, and they've not been able to overcome that here late in the year at least. But I think it should. I do think you want the best teams in, and the best teams are the ones that are playing better in the last half of the season.
Yeah, and to me, it absolutely should be that those last games of the season mean a lot, because the preseason and the non-conference, yes, that's important in terms of picking up wins, RPI, who you challenge yourself in the non-conference, but it also is a tool to prepare yourself for February and March. I always bring up what Kelvin Sampson used to say, which, again, Kelvin Sampson, I understand, is kind of a dirty word around Indiana, but he used to say you don't play February basketball in November. And so the teams that play in November and in December are playing different basketball than they do in February and in March. And if you're going to build your best NCAA tournament that you possibly can, it would seem you would want to bring in the teams that are playing as well as they could at the end of the season, mm-hmm. as opposed to some that maybe picked up some good wins early in the year when everybody was trying to get their footing.
No, I can't disagree with that. I think I would think that it might be in the back of the minds of some of the either-or decisions that might get made for those final few spots. But it's not on paper as a determining factor formally now. Yeah,
they might have the rules, but those yeah. folks are human too.
Yeah.
Well, speaking about a couple of big humans, you had Thon Maker and Thomas Bryant come to Assembly Hall, a couple of 7-footers that suddenly just show up on the scene. Indiana's been involved with them, but suddenly they make this trip. Your thoughts on their visit?
Suddenly is a good word, because we didn't get much advance notice, which is normally you do on a McDonald's All-American level kids, and for Indiana to have two guys in like that was huge news, especially when the coach's job is in a little bit of scrutiny, and the team needs size like it never has before. So it was big news. I think Thomas Bryant, this is the second trip, is a much more likely possibility. You're hearing really good things about Indiana's chances, especially on the same day we learned out he was visiting, we learned that Syracuse has been handed severe sanctions.
Yeah.
They're not 3 scholarships a year.
For the next 4 years, 5 years of probation.
Yeah.
Not postseason ban, but probation.
Yeah, but it affects the recruiting situation for them and their availability of scholarships. And that's been long considered a favorite for him because he's from Rochester, New York, which is Syracuse's backyard, and his mother's been pretty open about her desire for him to stay near home. So I think that was this is some real interesting. Kentucky's still involved. He may wait and see how the roster situation shakes out for Kentucky, both in terms of who goes pro from that team and other recruits that are 5-star level bigs like him, who jumps on board. But and he has really good shape. Missouri's also out there because his former high school coach is on the staff there. But the Hoosiers have a real good chance, and that would be a big boost maybe to Tom Crean's job security to have that size issue addressed with his commitment. Now, but we don't know. That's a possibility, and he had lost, but they did show great effort coming back like yesterday. So how that factors into things, I don't know. But Chuck Martin deserves a lot of credit for getting these two kids in. He's the new assistant with strong East Coast ties. He coached at Marist, which is a New York State where Thomas is from. So they feel real comfortable with him. So they've done a good job. But, they're still oversigned by 2. So if they add Thomas Bryant or another kid, that means they're oversigned by 3 or 4 or what have you. So that means players have to leave. And those players that leave contributors now that will cost them, in an area of the game next season, I don't know. But it is something to watch. There will be some minuses to add the pluses.
Yeah, and it was certainly a positive that for during a week where there weren't a whole lot of positives in terms of two losses, and it did get people kind of buzzing about what might be in the future beyond just the coaching situation.
Right, and I don't think they bring them in if they don't think they're going to be back.
Yeah,
and so that was an important step for them to bring him in. Thon Maker came with his brother, who's another big guy. He's a couple years younger. If Thon does reclass to 2015 like he wants to, I believe, so that they could have a little bit of a pipeline of size. I mean, the size issue has been gigantic for Indiana to overcome. They haven't done a little bit with the shooting and so forth, but life would be a lot easier if they had somebody they could play inside that was taller than 6'8".
Yeah, Tom Crean has talked about trying to get more creative to work in the paint, to feed the ball into the post. Well, it's tough to get creative when we're already at the Big Ten tournament. And
right.
you have to make a huge run to really help yourself and set yourself up in a good situation going forward. Now, one thing Indiana did do nice as well, no seniors on senior night, but they did honor the seniors of the 1974-75 team, and those guys certainly were honored, I think, to be at Assembly Hall and to be a part of that in 40 years after they had their great season.
Yeah, it was a terrific idea to honor them, especially considering he didn't have any seniors on this year's team, to have them introduced with the rest of the team like they were starters, to honor them that way. We met him had questions with the press before the game, and that was really neat. 4 of the 5 guys that were seniors on that team were back. They're all Indiana guys. They stayed in the community, stayed active. Steve Alfeld is still working with the team as a doctor. We see Laskowski every game. Laskowski and Steve Green's almost all there all the time. Kamstra lives in town, works for Cook. So those guys have stayed such a part of things. So it was really a cool thing for the university to honor what they accomplished with that team, that they probably would have won the title if Scott May hadn't gotten hurt.
Yeah, Steve Green, it makes no bones about it. They absolutely won, and they had some great stories here. Take a look at a couple of stories they had.
By the way, John Kamstra and Steve Alfeld and I, first day on campus, we're Knights recruits, right? We go, we say, hey, let's go play some basketball. Let's work out. We're now collegiate athletes, and we go over to Coach Knight, and the 3 of us sat in front of him and said, hey, Coach, where do we go get our gear so we can, shoot around? We thought we were really impressing him, and he goes, I hope you brought some gear. He said, because you haven't done a whole hell of a lot for this university yet. He said, you don't get any. And we looked at each other like, well, wait a minute, aren't we star players? And no, we're not. So we didn't even get any gear until we earned it.
Alfeld mentioned the Kansas game, and it was a close game and overtime. But they had a balcony that you had to walk under to get to the locker room, and this is one of the unique things that I remember. We were walking out underneath that balcony, and they were telling us to go home pig farmers.
I remember those.
Yeah. And I'm going, you guys are from Kansas, and you're calling us pig farmers?
Yeah. Oh, pig farmer. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, true story.
Now, of course, that 74-75 team went on a heck of a run during their year. Indiana, Mike, is going to need a big run in the Big Ten tournament.
Yeah, a loss sends them out of the tournament because right now Joe Lunardi has them as the last team in, as we mentioned before. But they're in critical. They have to get the win. They might need a second win, but one win for sure. And they right now, I think we're looking at 6:30. We're going to have Ken, we're going to have a get-together. I want to make sure people know about this. We like to do this when Indiana travels and the NCAAs, and now that we're outside of Indy area, we're going to do a little bit of that again. We're going to have a get-together right near United Center. Let me know. Send us an email if you want to get together. I think we'll probably be at 2:33 now that we know that the 5:30 Central Time as the tip-off, and it should be fun. But that game is huge for Indiana to rebuild some momentum and get going because it's the two forks, NIT or NCAA.
And certainly I know that I'm looking forward to get together. I'll be there. We hope that you can be there. We certainly appreciate you watching our show. So for Mike Pegram and Matt Weaver and Jeff Rabjohns, this is Ken Bikoff saying thanks for watching, everybody.